Good evening, YouTube. Tired Metalhead Weatherman here. Hope you guys are doing well. We made it. It's Friday. The weekend is ahead for a lot of us. And for those of us that are off work, congratulations. A couple of days of relaxation, maybe going out. But we also got to keep an eye on the weather for you guys. And then, of course, those of you that are on the grind still, keep your head up, of course. But we will still need to also be watching what's going on with the weather here. That's what guys like me are here for. That being said, let's go ahead and jump right on into things. It's actually going to be a pretty eventful weekend. So we have the atmospheric river already going on across Southern California. And this is going to continue over the next 12 to 24 hours. Then we'll start to see attention begin to shift up north, and we'll get more into the flood threat that exists with that. We will see a little bit of a downtrend in it, thankfully, though. Today seemed like it was going to be the worst day of Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And it looks like, as of right now, things haven't been awful. I haven't seen too much in the way of flood reports as of yet, but I haven't had a good chance to look at it as of right now. But things can obviously change in a heartbeat with those kinds of situations. As far as severe weather reports, we actually have had 10 wind reports, most of them in Florida. And then one in Idaho, which is interesting. We are seeing a little bit of warm air trying to sneak in across the west as we're dealing with this pattern change where we're going to be in a negative or a positive PNA where the air is going to be warmer out west and it's going to be colder out to the east. Really, as of late, we've been seeing the opposite. With these pattern shifts often come the chance of severe storms, and as a result, we do have low pressure that's going to be coming into play here across the southern plains and into the Ozarks. And this will lead to a slight risk that is mainly hail driven, but there is also a conditional tornado threat with this too, further to the south here, that we're going to be keeping an eye on. We've seen a little bit of a downtrend here because at one point there was a 5% area here that I was concerned about. I incidentally highlighted this area mostly for the largest hail threat, but tornado threat does exist with that as well, as there is a small pocket where we were seeing some decent low-level shear, but it's still not an impressive setup nonetheless. This is mainly going to probably stay a marginal risk unless we see an uptrend by morning, and I'll have a video for that in particular tomorrow. So that's what we have going on for Saturday. And then for Sunday, we have a day 3 slight risk that mainly exists across the Gulf Coast areas. We're towards Mobile and Biloxi. We're looking at you guys, and then sneaks up into southern Alabama, southern Mississippi, and even southwestern Georgia. We'll have to keep an eye on you guys. Some other towns, Columbus is in there too. Can't forget Tuscaloosa. A few other towns in line for this. Again, I think the threat mostly will be hail and wind. Small chance of a tornado, but that's minimal. Can't disinclude the marginal risk areas, even extending all the way towards the Georgia-Tennessee line. Atlanta are in there too, Birmingham, Greenville, New Orleans, Tallahassee, Savannah, Charleston. Plenty of you guys could have a oddball chance of a isolated severe storm or two. Mostly I'm thinking this is going to be a heavy rain threat, though. So that's what we're mainly dealing with on the severe side of things. Now to get to the flood threat. Flood threat mainly exists across southern and central California, as we've had a torrent of rain and moisture ongoing across these regions, along with snow melt to kind of compound things, of course. So this led to a what was earlier issued as a high-risk flood threat. We have seen a downtrend. We're back to moderate. Still not great, but at least we don't see that pink magenta-esque type color on the map, though. It's never a good thing to see. As we look towards the rest of the country for tonight and into the morning, things look like they're going to be pretty calm in regards to excessive rainfall outside of course, Southern California and parts of Nevada. So as we go to tomorrow, we see a major downtrend. We're now looking at only a slight risk, and this is across the Sierra Nevada region. There is room for this to be upgraded. I'm kind of leaning more so towards no. Saturday looks like it could be a quieter day from the looks of things, from what I've seen on the models. We'll get into that in a minute. And then, of course, with the severe weather threat, with the threat of isolated supercells that can produce over an inch an hour rainfall rates, of course, there exists a slight risk for flooding, which is what we will have here across the Ozarks. So go to day 3 into Sunday. We see a marginal risk over here. This could get upgraded to slight, but I'm kind of leaning more so towards no. And then, of course, we have more problems with the atmospheric river. As pre-mentioned before, the threat will shift a little further to the north this time. That being said, let's go ahead and switch over to the snowfall, which has been another problem. Over towards the higher elevations of the Sierras, of course, we're getting big-time snow. 2 to 3 feet have already fallen in the last 24 hours, and this has all been cut off by morning time. So there's still snow that hasn't been accounted for with this. That's one thing I want to note with this snowfall analysis here. So the Sierra Nevada is an area of interest for sure right now, and then over towards the more northern states like Idaho, we're seeing areas where we could get up to about a foot and a half. But a lot of areas it's a very widespread swath of about 3 to 6 inches for most areas. And this even extends further out to the east as we see this cutoff here in Wyoming, and then it redevelops over the Dakotas, Nebraska, towards Iowa. Wisconsin especially got hit really hard, and also over towards Lake Michigan. Chicago, we do see about an inch of snow. I think there might be more with that, but we'll have to see how things progress, because again, as I mentioned before, this ended at 6 a.m. this morning. More snow could have fallen between then and now. Then, of course, over towards central Michigan, we're dealing like over towards Grand Rapids, for example. We had some big time snow. Some areas around the area locally could have seen up to a foot. Detroit got in the action as well, 4 inches and counting right now. Nothing out to the northeast just yet, but your time is coming, and we will be mentioning you guys in just a bit. Another thing to look at, of course, is the rainfall, and of course, it's as to no one's surprise, we know that over towards Southern California has been hit the hardest. Some areas over here have gotten into the pink, which is getting close to or in between 6 to 8 inches of rainfall within the last 24 hours. Very dangerous conditions over there. And we're seeing plenty more widespread areas where we're getting up to about 4 to 5 inches of rainfall, or 3 to 5 inches of rainfall, mostly across these areas in the valleys in particular. This could be a big problem considering we have that snow melt, so river flooding is going to be a big concern as time goes on. There's actually chasers that are probably out here right now looking at this too. Wouldn't be surprised to hear if Reed Timmer was out here looking at some of the flooding that was ongoing there. Other than that, though, as far as rainfall is concerned, not a huge problem ongoing across the rest of the country. Over towards the southeast, we had a little bit of rainfall today. A lot of areas seeing less than an inch. Over towards Fort Worth, Dallas, we had in the areas to the east, we had a little bit more rainfall, about an inch, inch and a half. Getting close to 2 inches, but nothing really major beyond that point. All the greatest action seems to be over towards the West Coast, particularly around California. So that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the temperatures, what we're going to be expecting throughout the course of the weekend. So what we're seeing here right now, it's still pretty cold over to the west, but warm temperatures are starting to creep in. I did not know why that sounding's popped up, but it's cold out to the west right now. But you can see here towards the southwest that warm air is starting to sneak its way in, and we're eventually going to see, as time goes on, this cold air is going to start to sink its way to the south and east. So you can see, even as we move this map forward here, this cold air is going to start pushing its way further east, and that warm air will start to take over just a little bit here. You can even see this plume of Arctic air starting to sneak its way in as we head into Sunday morning. Saturday could be a cold morning. Sunday could be cold. It's really not until we get into Monday Tuesday of next week, where we'll really notice a difference in those colder temperatures. But for the most part, we're still in the same pattern for the most part, but the temperatures are definitely changing. We're by Sunday, we're going to be seeing highs across the southeast in the 50s, and then over to areas further in the south, seeing mid 60s, a few 70s here and there. And then, of course, further up north, we're seeing those teens, those 20s, 30s, and colder temperatures could be yet to come for those areas. But that will be discussed as we look towards the end of the weekend and into the start of next week. Let's go back to the precipitation forecast here, because that shouldn't have been up to begin with. So here's what we have going on right now. Here is our next winter system right here. Now we're starting to see snow get into play here across the northeast here. See areas like New York City, Philly, starting out as rain, and you probably will end out as snow. Maybe across Philly, you may get nothing at all. But over towards New York, we're going to end out as snow and maybe even get a little bit of accumulation with that as well. And then over towards the Great Lakes, towards Lake Erie, Lake Toronto, or Lake Ontario. I don't know why I was about to call it Toronto. But Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, if you're off of those lakes, you could see some pretty impressive snowfall totals. And then, of course, here comes our secondary system. Could bring some big-time snow towards Iowa. Of course, over towards Wisconsin and Minnesota yet again. North Dakota looks like they're going to get more snow this time. South Dakota might get a little bit stifled by that. Then over towards the Ohio Valley and even parts of the Virginias here, especially towards the higher elevations, we could see some moderate to even heavy snow possible there. And then as we head through Sunday and into Monday, we could see some increased snowfall. And this time, this is where Philly will probably get into the action at this point. So that's something to look at there. Let's go ahead and take a look at what our snowfall totals and rainfall totals will look like. We'll start out with rainfall. We'll just shift this all the way over to 60 hours out and do a little bit of a model comparison with that. So there's a lot to look at here. Start out with the global models, Euro first. Of course, the greatest precipitation is mainly going to be across the Sierras. One thing I want to note, as well as I have in previous videos, that this does not depict whether this is rainfall or snowfall. So don't get confused if you're up in the higher elevations here, because this is all based off quantitative precipitation, not exactly rainfall, but this is a good measuring tool for rainfall. Over towards these regions around the west coast, this is most likely going to be rain. You could see up to another 2 inches possibly within the next 60 hours. Over towards the southeast, we could see some higher totals there as well, up to about 2 inches, maybe 3 inches over the next few days. It is supposed to be pretty active across that region. And of course, there could be increased snowfall up north, although relatively light in nature. And then, of course, we're watching, of course, the northeast, northwest. Most of that's going to be snowfall, which we'll cover in just a minute. So that's what the Euro is looking like. Switch this over to the Canadian. Of course, totals are a little bit more aggressive. Would not read too heavily into this. Wouldn't be ruled out, but we don't know what type of precip that's going to be or at least we won't know unless it's based off elevation here. Totals over here can't be ruled out, but I think, like I said, the worst of that was going to be earlier today, and we've already seen that for the most part. Could see plenty more tonight, but it shouldn't be in the same kind of abundance or severity like we saw earlier. So the GFS, a little bit closer to what the Euro is showing. Over towards North Georgia, we're getting some higher totals there as well. And then South Georgia, towards the Atlantic coast, we could see some pretty impressive totals there too. And this is where we get into the regional models. We're looking at the traditional NAM. Totals are a little bit more realistic there. Then when we get into the NAM 3 kilometer, the short range model, the convective model, totals are a little bit better defined here. Of course, towards the west coast, we have to always watch for the variability given the potential behind not Arctic but atmospheric river. Then when we look at the blend of models, which is the last one we're going to look at here, this one seems the most realistic. I think maybe about an inch of rainfall over the next 60 hours is pretty likely across the southeast for a large portion of states from Alabama, Mississippi, even Georgia, parts of Tennessee, of course. And then, of course, towards the west coast, I think a couple inches could be more realistic, but still not ideal, considering the fact that we've already had a bunch of rainfall as is. Flooding is a concern, landslides are a concern, mudslides are a huge concern. So any rainfall at this point is not helping at this point. We really just want this system out of here. So the next thing, and really the last thing we're going to look at, of course, now is the snowfall. There's not really much of an ice threat to look at here, so we're not going to be concerned with it. We've known what the deal is going to be for these areas for days, but we're just going to go ahead and make sure we've covered that just as we head into the weekend here. We already know where the highest totals are going to be across the Sierra Nevadas towards the highest of elevations. 5 feet of snow or more possible in some of these regions. And then, of course, lighter totals, less than a foot here, which is the first time I've seen that in a while. And then, of course, to the east of Denver and the Rockies, we could see some pretty impressive totals, 1 to 2 feet possible there. Can't be ruled out. North Dakota, with the storm track that we have now, looks like you guys are going to get a good piece of the action there, especially towards Wisconsin and Minnesota. Can't forget Iowa here, where we could see up to about 4, maybe even 5 inches in some spots, but mainly thinking 1 to 3 inches is going to be the main amount that we're going to be looking at here. It's interesting to see how the totals kind of lighten up once we get towards Michigan, but then pick back up as we have that low starting to deepen as we get towards the Poconos here. And it looks like New York City gets a healthy amount of snow here. About 2 to 3 inches could be possible to even likely, according to the Euro here. And then once we look at the mountains over here towards the Virginias, we could see 1 to 3 inches easily. Some spots could get up to even 6 inches possibly, according to this. This does try to sneak its way south to the Appalachians. Does get through the mountains in North Carolina, where we could see up to about an inch or 2 possibly. And when we make our comparisons, Canadians hanging a little bit further to the north. But other than that, it's not really looking too much different. Of course, the Canadians always a very aggressive model, so of course the totals are going to be a lot different looking in comparison. GFS is pretty aggressive in its own right here. Oops, I did not mean to click that. That time that was my fault. But we can still see up to almost 4 to 5 feet up across the Sierras. Similar look when it comes to snowfall across North Dakota. South Dakota gets a little bit more stifled on this one. And then, of course, it's the same story across Minnesota, Wisconsin, and even parts of Michigan here. A little bit more gracious with the snowfall totals there, or a little bit more generous, so to speak. And then also just more generous across the board for the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. So when we go over to the NAM, it's a pretty similar look. Slightly what I would consider to be a little bit more realistic. Although this does have a little bit more of a bullseye over New York, where we could see up to about 4 inches. Not too much deviance between the other models, but definitely a little bit more notable. It's a little bit more of a trend to the south too, as far as snow is concerned towards the Midwest. We even could see some action in St. Louis on this one. And then, of course, out west, it looks pretty much identical. Totals are about the same, a little bit more over towards the Euro. So a little bit of small inconsistencies, but not much to really be concerned with here. We already know that this area is going to get slammed with snow towards the higher elevations particularly. Here's the 3 kilometer NAM. Pretty aggressive totals with that, especially off the mountain peaks here. We could see up to about 6 feet or more even, according to this. And then the trend with the convective NAM, or the NAM 3 kilometer, is that we're seeing the snow kind of take a little bit of a jog further to the north as it heads further to the east. So we're seeing northern Minnesota and northern Wisconsin getting the higher totals. And then we see areas like Michigan, or states like Michigan, getting next to nothing, oddly, mainly could be because of the Great Lakes being a little warmer. Could be a couple of other unknown variables there. Then when we look towards the Ohio Valley, I think some of them get more totals than the parts of central Michigan here. Even then, it's not much. It's about maybe an inch or two for them. And then as we go towards the east here, we even can see Philly getting into the action here. You could see a trace of snow. Mountains over here out west looking like they're going to get a similar total to the other models. And then, of course, New York is a huge question mark. Looks like we're getting more aggressive totals here towards New York City. About 3 to 5 inches could be possible there. Off the Great Lakes, we could get up to about 7, maybe even 8 inches or more in some spots. The Adirondacks don't look that impressive now. We've kind of trended a little bit away from them at the moment, but we'll see how this goes forward, because I think this is going to lean into a system that will be in effect for these regions more so on Monday. Last thing to look at, I guess, will be the blend of models here. So the blend of models here, it's a pretty similar look, a little bit more realistic. This has New York City leaning more so towards about 3 inches. Philly gets stifled on this one. Snow trends seem to lean more towards a system moving a little further to the north here, although it looks like western Michigan gets a little bit more action in there. Towards Ohio, the Ohio Valley, in the Great Lakes states, we see about an inch or more of snow possible there in some regions. A lot of areas look like they're going to get trace, or maybe even nothing. Towards the mountains out west, or around West Virginia, or the Virginias, could be seeing up to about 2 to 4 inches possibly. And then the picture's pretty much the same out west. We pretty much know what to expect there. We'll have to see how things play out for the states a little further to the east when we head into the start of next week here. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But till then, that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, and if you found it useful, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Share the video to anyone that may find it useful. Let me know in the comments, of course, what weather you could be experiencing this weekend. Hopefully it's good. Hopefully it's ideal for you. But anyway, this has been Tyler Metalhead Weatherman. You guys have a good night. Be good this weekend and take care. And for anyone that's interested, I'll see you in the morning. Till then, good night.